Hey, hey, hey. Good afternoon, good morning, good all of that stuff. And happy Tuesday. Thank you for joining us again for another edition of Coloring the Conversation. This is a special one today. Who I have with me is Miss Shonita Roach. She is the founder of the Shades of You, Shades of Me, and I'm going to give her an opportunity to tell you about that. But we're talking about her story today and how important our stories are, especially as it relates to our mental health and perinatal mental health. And we want you to know that your story matters. And so I have invited this very special person here today, Miss Shonita. Why don't you tell us a little bit of, first of all, I'm Andrea Clark Horton. My name is there, right? But I'm the director of the Alliance for People of Color with PSI. And I would like for my guest, Miss Shonita, to please introduce herself, say a little bit about who you are, what you do, where you're from, all of that.
Yeah, so my name is Shonita Roach. I'm the executive director of Shades of You, Shades of Me. I am a native of Chicago,
Whoop, whoop.
Illinois. What show up? Um, and um, I've had the opportunity of growing up in cities and transplants and being able to find myself throughout all my life journey from trauma into healing. um, I am pleased and always honored whenever I'm in the presence of someone such as yourself, Andrea, who is so great and dynamic. And I thank you so much for allowing me to speak on this platform.
Absolutely, Shanita. See, that's why I keep forgetting that you're from Chicago, because right now you're where in Wisconsin, right?
Yeah, Madison, Wisconsin, 12 years I've resided here. And it has been good because moving oftentimes, especially when you want to move, moving oftentimes could bring that evolve. And I believe that being here for the last 12 years has allowed me the time to get away from all those childhood traumas that I endured while I was in Chicago and then make choices now for myself as being an adult and a transplant from Chicago into Wisconsin, bringing some of my native roots, bringing some of my upbringings and applying some of those things here. And I believe that's where I grew and I bloomed from.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I always forget that you're from Chicago. You a homegirl. You my homegirl, because that's where I'm sitting right now, right? Yeah. So tell me, how did you find PSI? How long have you been involved with PSI, and what's your connection to PSI and the Alliance?
I was one of the few African American women at the time back in like 2016 that was involved with PSI. So it came at a crazy point. Someone else had introduced me into PSI. And so I remember attending their first conference, well, my conference in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only like six of us then. And we realized, like, yes, this is a wealth of information, but how does this really apply to people of color?
Mm-hmm.
And so a couple of those people, who I attended with was Jabina, Desiree, and Divya. And
Mm-hmm.
so, to see the alliance bloom from even that conference in 2017 to see where Shades of You, Shades of Me came out of, derived from. And then I've seen other people also come and do some great, awesome things. So that is one of my first initial times where I've connected with PSI, plus Wendy Davis, of course. She is
Mm-hmm.
a trooper. Okay. She stayed on me. She was like, look, you have a dynamic story. Where it will lead you, I don't know. But PSI will always be here as a supportive body. And I can testify to say that that is absolutely true.
Yeah, so God, that is wonderful, girl. Wendy Davis, our executive director for Postpartum Support International, who actually
Mhm.
introduced me to you. Last
Yes.
year at the PSI conference in New Orleans, you were one of the first folks I met, after I met Wendy, because of course we all work virtually. So I met Wendy and she said, "You have to meet Shonita, right? And you have to hear part of her story, right?" And she's like, "I'm not going to tell you because Wendy is just such a sensitive and dynamic person in that way. Like, she said, I'm not going to tell you her story. I want her to tell you what she wants you to know of it." And so
Mhm.
you do have a story, right? And I think that I was so inspired after kind of listening to you and listening to how your story moved you into this space where Shades of You, Shades of Me was kind of birthed out of your story.
Yeah.
So, um, why don't you tell us a little bit about, the the story that led you even into being concerned about perinatal mental health issues and how they affect communities of color. That comes from a personal space for you.
Absolutely. So it's just like having food deserts. When a person doesn't have access to peer support, community based support, um, therapists, practitioners, it's creating a desert and desolate and an isolation for that person. So
Mm-hmm.
my personal story started from when I was born, practically raised within the system, Department of Children and Family Services. So I learned a lot within that infrastructure. So that takes a part of my story. But my story of perinatal mental health, where it started from was being a 21-year-old who had a 21-month-old. And at the time, again, when I speak about desolate, I, who had grown up in the system for 17 years, could not connect how to safely transfer both me and myself, my son, at the time, from one location to the next.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was always something where we were assisted by caseworkers. And
Mm-hmm.
for that day, it didn't happen. So I utilized the tools that I thought were available to me, which was a payphone. And I left my 21-month-old son in an apartment at the time. I left him with some food, and I went out to make some calls to see who could help us move
Mm-hmm.
that day. And because that was all the tools that I had in my toolkit at that time, that's what I utilized. So I
Mm-hmm.
went outside and I made some calls. And I'll never forget one of the last calls that I made, which was to my sister. And I was telling her what was going on. And she said, "Where is EJ?" Which was my son's nickname. And I said, "Well, he's upstairs, he eating and everything else, but I really need to figure out how we are going to move from here because we're being evicted."
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll never forget, because being on the payphone, you know how it was in Chicago, Lord, them coins, you better have them coins on deck. Because if
Right.
not, that payphone goes shut
It's
off.
gonna cut you off. Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so it cut me off when I was speaking with my sister. And so I ran upstairs afterwards to go check in on my son. Unfortunately, the scene that I'm going to describe is not favorable. And what do I mean by favorable? That oftentimes we may enter into a situation unknowingly.
Mm-hmm.
And this situation that I entered into was unfavorable for me because it changed the course of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came into the apartment, I called out my son EJ's name, and he didn't come from any room, the room that I left him in. And so I went scour into our little small apartment, and he didn't appear anywhere. So prior to me going to the payphone, I had propped up things and stuff because we were in a place of preparedness. And when I went into the room, the very thing that I propped up, which was a box spring and mattress, are the articles that he was found underneath. And I raised the bed quickly, and I got him, gathered him, and went out to the hallway and made an announcement like, "Hey, look, we need help!" Screaming for help, and it was the neighbors at the end of the hallway who opened up their doors and they let us in, and that's when I was made aware that my son was lifeless. And also, again, this would change the course of my life. It changed the course of my life in losing and grieving a child, and then also being incarcerated because of being accused of his death. And so that is how I entered into the perinatal world by lived in experience.
My lived experience. Wow, Shanita. Thank you so much for sharing that, sharing your story. Um, and so, did you? I know at the time you said, this is a whole lot that's happening, right? Because
Yeah.
your child is, you've lost your child, um, and then in the midst of all of that, you're dealing with the legal system and the court system, and ending up incarcerated. Did you know at the time that there was even such a thing as like perinatal mental health or perinatal mood disorder or like depression that results from a serious trauma like losing a child? Did you know any of that? How did you figure out what was going on with you? Or can you talk about what was going on with you? Like, how did this show up in you?
Wow. So that's a big question, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
at the time I was still in DCFS.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you have people around who are professionals, and, we had monthly evaluations, especially if you had a child, they would connect with you and speak with you. I was always seen as a very strong individual. So I really didn't have those conversations too much with the psychiatric team or even with therapists, even though they were available to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not made known or knowledgeable to this until after my incarceration. So I look back in 2022. That was not a term of postpartum depression.
Mm-hmm.
That was not a term of perinatal mood disorder.
Mm-hmm.
That did not exist in the modern society. If it were made known, it was only made known to, again, certain groups of occupations and professionals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, like at the time this happened, and this has been over 20 years ago now, right? Yeah.
Yes.
At the time this happened, you're saying that you were kind of viewed by the the caseworkers and the folks you had regular contact with who would check in, like, oh, Shanita doesn't really need, a
Mhm.
therapist, so we don't need to take her for a psych evaluation or anything like that. She's good.
Yeah.
Uh, but you didn't even know. Like nobody brought up to you that you might be dealing with some grief or loss because of this is a perinatal mood disorder. You might have been dealing with postpartum depression. You never even heard those words.
Oh no, in our communities, that's absolutely taboo anyway. Like we don't even speak about depression, even in a way of it being acute, let alone
Mm-hmm.
clinical. We don't speak about
Mm-hmm.
depression in that way, right? We have slangs and different terminologies to express when a person is in endurement. And then we also have some of those expressions that may be a little bit dismissive, right? To what
Mm-hmm.
we're really actually going through. Oh, girl,
Mm-hmm.
you'll get over it. Oh, girl, it's just a
Mm-hmm.
phase. I went through it too, and that's how we communicate with one another. But that's also how we inspire and encourage one another, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so having education and having training is absolutely imperative because it gives us the opportunity to ask one another the right questions.
Yeah.
And at that time, I was not asked the right questions.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
And if I were, in all honesty, knowing what circumstance I was in, and being high risk, already being in the community with moms who had children, um, I would have thought this could potentially have my child removed.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want my child to be removed. So
Mm-hmm.
what am I going to do? I'm going to deflate. Even if I am absolutely experiencing this, I'm going to downplay it to the absolute T,
Mm-hmm.
because I love my son and I don't want to see him being removed from my our household.
Mm-hmm.
But what I did do a year prior to this incident happening, my son stayed with my foster mom for 6 months, because my foster mom, who is not an educator, but she had dealt with foster children for a very long time. And so she like raised me. That's how I got the last name Roach, and I was adopted by her. But when I went to my adopted mom and I let her know, hey, look, I'm not feeling so well. She, and knowing the situation that I was in with his father, she said, Shanita, drop him off here. And
Mm-hmm.
until you are prepared to get him, he will be here. So
Mm-hmm.
there are parts in my story where my son was not there because I was in an absolute critical um, part in my life, in a very indecisive place in my life. But my adopted mom recognized that.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the reason why being undiagnosed and untreated at that time, my adopted mother had passed 6 months prior.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I had my son in my care for
Mm-hmm.
an extended amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Again, being undiagnosed and untreated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And only she was privy to that information.
Yeah. 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 So you just knew you weren't feeling like yourself.
I knew I wasn't feeling like myself. My son's father at the time was absolutely physical abusive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I knew that I didn't want my son to see that nor experience it. I had him when I was 19 years old. Again, still dealing with DCFS. There was a lot of police involvement at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it really, really affected and impacted the relationship and nurturing and bonding that I could have had with my son, EJ. And,
Yeah.
and you don't know those things when you're young. It
Mm-hmm.
takes the wisdom of elders. It takes
Mm-hmm.
the wisdom of others to see what you're enduring.
Mm-hmm. And so your adoptive mom, bless her heart, said, bring that baby to me. Like this is one of the things that we do, and as African American women, but also in other, I'm sure in other communities at large, but especially in other communities of color, like the raising of this child is not
Mhm.
something that you do in isolation. So even
Yes.
if she couldn't tell you, like, you know, go get help, you need to see a therapist, you need to see it, talk to somebody at an agency that might be able to help you find a better relation, get a way to deal with this relationship you in. She did know, I'm gonna help
Mhm.
you raise this child, I'm gonna take
Yes.
care of this child right now, and so it's
Mhm.
kind of a communal aspect to how we care for one another and our children.
Yes.
That's that village, yeah. But you were going through, kind of, you have this brand new baby, you're in this relationship that was toxic,
Hmm.
and now your son is with your adoptive mother until she passes, and
Hmm.
now he's still a little one. But
Yes.
what were you so now he's come back to you, but what were you feeling? Like what was going on with you? Were you, besides just being in this toxic relationship, what do you remember, how you were feeling, what you were thinking?
Oh my goodness. After my adopted mom passed, I didn't know that she was my best friend. And I did not know that she
Mm,
was my greatest supporter.
Mm.
And you never really feel that until after a passing of something.
Mhm.
Um, all I kept remembering was, I wish she was here so that I can ask her certain questions.
Mm. Mhm.
And she wasn't there any longer.
Mhm.
And I didn't know that I was grieving. And I didn't
Mm.
know how quickly I would start the grieving cycle.
Mhm.
Um, and then there were times where, EJ wanted me. And all I wanted was my mom to tell me, how do I want, this kid? How do I
Mhm.
want to receive him? How do I nurture him? Even though there were times like when I went over to my mom's house, she would sit down and just like put so much into me in terms of like breastfeeding, the importance thereof. She would, make sure that he slept next to me. So she always like made that connection and nurturing and bonding.
Mhm.
And so when she wasn't there to help me make that connection, it's like uncertainty kicked in.
Mhm.
Can I really do this? Like,
Mhm.
can I really do this? Like, ask yourself some real questions. Can I
Mhm.
really do this? And I really, really thought that I could. I'm like,
Mhm.
I could do this.
Mhm.
I've winged it so long with myself. Certainly, I can wing it with a kid, and
Mhm.
that's not so, right?
Mhm.
And what I'm saying is, you cannot wing mental health.
Mhm.
You cannot wing not being untreated and undiagnosed. You
Yeah.
can't wing that, because
Yeah.
somewhere in your life, it is absolutely going to be impactful.
Yeah.
And in my life, not knowing exactly what was going on with me impacted the loss of someone whom I absolutely love and miss to this day and
Yeah.
wish he were here.
Yeah. Yeah. So you ended up after this tragic thing that happened with EJ. You ended up in prison.
Yes.
Yeah. And at that point, did you realize that, your mental health was had been compromised and maybe you needed help? Or at what point did you feel like I know that I need to talk to somebody?
Ooh, you don't know those things until it all comes to the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that I needed help until after I got out of my situation. Because right now, all I'm focusing in on is, how did this happen?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was my main focus. I'll never forget that there was a forensic psychologist who had looked at the whole case of what happened with me and my son, and how I was placed in jail because of it and charged with first-degree murder.
Mm.
He stated on the stand, he said that when he looked at the autopsy report, that there was a scar on EJ's forehead because he had been with my cousins and he had fell down like a flight of stairs. However, when he looked at the autopsy, there was neosporin found on his forehead.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just put neosporin on his forehead that morning before I went to go make the phone call.
Mm-hmm.
And his testimony was that no mother heals to kill.
Mm.
And that was like a turning point in my case
Mm.
because of that evidence of caring and,
Mm-hmm.
the nurturing that my mother, taught me.
Mm-hmm.
That was like really essential. That was the turning point.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also because of growing up in DCFS. That
Mhm.
was also a attributing factor into why my charges was lessened.
Mhm.
I didn't independently seek mental health care after incarceration. It wasn't until I was pregnant with my living eldest son, who is now 16, that I was placed in, he was placed rather into DCFS, and I had to go through a process of custody.
Mm.
And so they stated as one of the stipulations in order for me to be seen as, you know, a mother who was fit to raise him, that I had to go through parenting classes, and I absolutely had to meet with a psychotherapist.
Mhm.
I didn't want to meet with a psychotherapist. I'm
Mm.
like, what for? What
Mhm.
for? Because after you've already received like 17 years worth of therapy, you don't necessarily see the accomplishments in therapy. Although I know for me, there are big factors in those 17 years that I didn't appreciate then that I absolutely appreciate now.
Mhm.
So when I had to go to that psychotherapist, honey, look, if she didn't remind me of my adopted mother,
Mhm.
it was so easy to open up to her. It was so
Mhm.
easy. She was a pastor's wife. My
Mhm.
mom was a pastor's wife. So she had that upbringing that didn't make me feel like I was being judged.
Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
And oftentimes when you carry heavy stories,
Mhm.
you you want to protect whatever it is that you need to say, but never once did I ever think that this woman judged me.
Mm.
It was a crazy thought. And
Mhm.
but look, this woman, her name was Edith. And I'm telling you, I would beat her, I would beat her to her office on my appointments. Okay. I would be sitting out in the waiting lobby
Mhm.
waiting for this woman. I never
Mhm.
forget one day she canceled our appointment. Honey, if I had never felt a brick fall into my stomach, because I wanted to tell Miss Edith all about my day, all about my week,
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. Yeah. That was an incredible feeling of like that healing, right? That being able to release all of this stuff that you've been holding on, and have somebody hold that space with you, that is there simply to, because they want to see you feel better too.
Yes. And
Mhm.
she genuinely did. And I I appreciate that woman. I think she, like, as soon as she saw that I was on board and I was committed, even if I was committed, even if I did not receive custody, regain custody
Mm.
of Atlas,
Mm.
I was that committed to wanting to be healed,
Mm.
and not say was what is just appropriate to get results that I needed, or just to, shy away, because I
Mhm.
did that for 17 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was easy to do.
It was easy to do. Like when you
Mhm,
had to do your check-ins with DCFS and
mhm.
all of that, and they'd ask you these questions to see if you were okay. You knew the right things to say so that they would leave you alone. But
Yes.
but it wasn't until you met Miss Edith that you, and this is after prison, this is after the birth of your eldest living son now,
Mhm.
that you felt like, I'm comfortable enough with Miss Edith that I'm I'm focused on, for real. There's something to this. There's I really
Yeah.
want the healing. Like this healing feels good.
Yes.
Hmm.
It felt so good. Like I said, it had me running. It had me running to be healed and
Oh,
to
girl, I thought
get
she was talking
healing.
about, she was running around the waiting room. What'd you say?
Oh, honey, look, that receptionist knew when I opened up the door. They was like, Miss Edith is in another appointment right now. She'll be with you shortly. But I wanted that receptionist to make sure she pinned in to tell Miss Edith that I was in the waiting room.
Uh-huh.
And oftentimes, what I've learned in this healing journey, that you may not have immediate entrance, right? But
Mm-hmm.
as long as you're on the wait list of something, you waiting, for your journey to start, or mid journey, or for your healing to begin to revive itself and to reveal itself, right?
Mm.
And I didn't know then I was showing up for my own healing.
Hey, come on, girl. You were showing up for your own healing. You thought I was going back to do what the judge said so I can get my baby.
Hmm.
You were showing up for you.
Yes.
Amen. Amen. Girl, that's a word right there. That's a word, that's a word. Um, so how did this and that journey, that healing journey lead you to shades of you, shades of me?
Well, so back in 2018, I was supposed to do a conference called Imagine Me Living Beyond My Barriers. However, that conference didn't occur. I was in co-collaboration with someone. And actually that person was also attendee at the PSI conference. And so it didn't happen, it didn't occur, but it did not take away my pain that I was experiencing internally.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that something had to be done.
Mm-hmm.
I got tired of seeing people of color just being a presentation, a bullet point presentation, and then a next slide onto the next slide. And I said, no, 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 we're real people, like
Mm-hmm.
with real experiences. And
Mm-hmm.
we absolutely should talk about these things. Why
Mm-hmm.
aren't we talking about it? And so I put together my first Shades to You, Shades to Me conference back in 2019. And I didn't care who showed up. Let me tell you, I had like dynamic speakers, okay? And I didn't care who was in the room
Mm-hmm.
because I needed to be there. So it was like, I did that out of kind of like being selfish. No one knew,
Uh-huh.
like that was my selfish point. Like, hold up, I need more information as to why I'm feeling this way, what policy is around this, like, healing everything. And so I got that, honey. I cried some tears,
Mm.
released a lot of anguish because I did not know that I was pregnant with something bigger,
Mm.
bigger than the story that was being cultivated.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember after I did the first conference, they came back and was like, so when's the next one? And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
next one? Who said it was gonna be the next one?
You're like,
No.
I got what I came for. What y'all
Right.
talking about
Okay.
the next
Right.
one?
Like I put on my whole church service, deliverance service. Thank you. Uh, like, what do you mean the next conference? And so truly that's when I started to take ownership of
Mm-hmm.
not only of my story, but how I presented it, right? Because oftentimes that's the most important part.
Yeah.
Um, Oftentimes when I tell my story, I start with saying, as a disclaimer, I'm going to tell you a broken story, but from a healed place.
Mm.
Because I can only tell you the places that I've journeyed through and the places that I have healed from.
Mm.
Other than that, I'm just telling you a story. And then afterwards, all I'm doing is re-breaking myself,
Ooh.
re-traumatizing
Mm.
myself,
Mm-hmm.
retracting. And that isn't good for myself, let alone for my children or
Mm-hmm.
anyone else around me.
Mm-hmm.
Anything stagnant lackens movement.
Amen.
So I knew that I couldn't be put in that position. So now when I tell my story, especially about Shades to You, Shades to Me, it's always from a healed place, whether I'm sharing my personal story or, from the professional side of things or helping other people cultivate their story.
Mm-hmm.
I always say, hey, look, you need to pitch something that you'll always remember, that'll always keep you but it's mixed in with a little bit about your past and where you are now.
And where you are now. So you're always talking about so that people will know that healing is possible. That we think about the journey as just about the difficulties, right? But that healing is part of that journey too. So
Yes.
so tell us about the mission and the vision of Shades of You, Shades of Me. What is it that out of this conference that you thought was a one-time thing, now you have a whole you've gone from being a mom to being in a prison to now out of prison and starting healing and having more children to being a whole executive director of your own thing. Won't me do it? But what is Shades of You, Shades of Me? What is it about? What does it do?
Oh, great. So we get to raise awareness around multiculturalism and as it relates to maternal mental health. Now, I know oftentimes we like to categorize things to make it, applicable to us or relate to us. However, when we're talking about multiculturalism, we're talking about communities that have absolutely been left behind, but yet left behind as people, but up front in terms of data. We want to switch that narrative. So,
Mm-hmm.
what is it? We raise awareness around multiculturalism in maternal mental health. So, we can go into the depth of it. What does it really mean for people of color, right? So, I mentioned within my story how I was afraid that if I told the truth, my child would be removed. So, we talk about the fears, the barriers, the stigmas that already lay there. So we go in depth in areas of incarceration, foster care, things that are truly not a part of our culture, but somehow have gotten embedded into our
Mm,
culture.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we're on the forefront of it.
Yeah.
And so that generates conversations,
Okay.
that generates how do we change this narrative. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
a huge person on narratives.
Mm-hmm.
um, I believe that narratives either can support a story, support a body of people, or a narrative that is crafted incorrectly can absolutely do harm. And I
Mm-hmm.
believe that some of the narratives that have been crafted for people of color are absolutely false.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, girl. And I think that when I first met you, I think that that's the thing that grabbed me because at the time I'm still in the PhD program and I was trying to think about like studying like how people of color heal differently, right? But it's also about having narrative is really important to me as well. And you're absolutely right. Like there are narratives that have been written for us that we take on sometimes that we don't even know we are taking on, but they're written for us to the benefit of somebody else, right?
Yes.
Right. And so helping people to first step back and see this is the narrative that you've adopted for yourself. Does this really fit you? Is this
Mhm.
really fit you? But also, how do you help people find their own voice and write their own story? And I love it that you said it's. I tell my story as a story of it's a broken story, but from a healed place. And so, can you talk a little bit about how crafting your story or writing or rewriting your story helped you get to that healed place?
Oh, so Andre, I don't want to tell my age or anything like that, right?
I'm
But
old. I'm older than you. It's okay.
oh, okay, okay. So, I don't know if you remember back in the 80s and 90s, there were books that were out, and it gave you like a subject matter, and then it gave you a body, but within the body, you had choices
Yes.
that you could make in
The,
order to come to the conclusion at the
mhm.
end of it.
Uh-huh.
Now, I'm going to say half the time I was like, what was I thinking?
Mm,
Forward to this page. And then you're like, hold on. The story that was put together isn't what the outcome that I thought it was going to be, right?
mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is, is that there were other options too.
Mhm.
And you still have the ability to go back and explore those options until you begin to craft the story that you want to tell, until
Mm.
you begin to have the outcome that you want to receive.
Mhm.
That is the beauty in storytelling.
Mhm.
You realize that where I started, my starting point doesn't have to be my ending point,
Right. Right. Right.
and I realized that yes, it is a pipeline that occurred in my life in which I had no control over. I had no
Mhm.
control over the childhood trauma that I received. But
Mhm.
anything I invite as an adult, a consenting adult, is the story that I'm still choosing to participate in. It
Amen.
is not a narrative that I am crafting for myself. It is something that I'm openly choosing. So
Mhm.
whatever outcome that I receive is something by my own choice.
We making it, and then to be gracious with ourselves, right? As we make some of these choices, and even as a grown up, you still gonna make some choices that lead you to places or have consequences that you don't, that you don't necessarily love the outcome. But the beauty of it is in knowing. I think sometimes when we get trapped in our thinking is to think that we don't have a choice in some
Yeah.
things, right? There's some things I didn't have a choice in, right? I didn't have a
Yeah.
choice whether or not to be born black and born female, right? That
Mhm.
that's something I didn't have a choice in. But what I do with that and what that means for me and how I project that to the world are absolutely things that I have choices in, right? And so
Yeah.
there are already narratives that are written for me as a black female. And I can choose to adopt those things or I can choose to pick and choose from those things. I can choose to write my own, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I choose to write my own.
Yeah.
At one point in time, especially growing up in the system, my narrative was already written for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was already written. I did not have a choice in the matter. There was so much power in their pen that all it takes for me nowadays is just to show up and be actionary.
Yeah.
People are going to write narratives about you, whether it's false or whether it's true. People are going to bear witness one way or another. We live in a society right now, and I have to say this, I am so glad that I did not have the things that occurred in my life back then happen now.
Mm.
Uh, because of how society shuns certain things that occur in your life, whether it's accidental or intentional.
Mm-hmm.
How we categorize things, right? We put things that are elements in our lives that we have no control over, and people are absolutely judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
So for me to have the opportunity in my later years to be able to talk about and discuss some of these things is a privilege. And I count it as a privilege because I
Mm-hmm.
look at other populations right now who are growing up in this time, and they are not as apt to say or even have the opportunity to say what I could have and should have said then
Yeah.
because it wasn't as recorded.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now
Yeah.
people are more in a vulnerable state, and advocacy is important. Sharing your story is important, but the risk, the danger is almost 10 times higher than it was when I was growing up.
Yeah.
So you look at the place of where you're gracious at, where you're committed at, and absolutely devoted.
Absolutely. That's good. I always say I'm glad the internet just started popping off when I was like 18 or 19. And there wasn't no cell phones with video cameras and all of that stuff. And there wasn't no
Hmm.
Twitter and no Facebook and no Snapchat or any of that, right? And so, you know, I believe when I see the Lord, He gonna have some stuff to say to me, but that's between me and Him. That ain't between me and Twitter though. It ain't between me and Twitter. So I absolutely get what you're saying. So tell us about you continue to do this Shades You Shades of Me conference. Tell us a little bit about the conference you got coming up next month out in Seattle, Washington. Come on.
Look, let me tell you. So now I'm gonna get a little lax because you want to know what? I get excited when I'm able to bring forth conversations, meet new people. I am honored. Here's where I'm honored. I'm honored because you're our keynote speaker. You're one of
Oh
our
my
keynote
goodness.
speakers, right?
Yes,
So I already
yes.
know you're gonna bring it not just on behalf of Black women, but you're gonna represent so many communities with all the great work that you do, as being director of the Alliance. And
Hmm.
then, we have an international keynote. You think about these things, or not even so much how it can expand over time, but this conversation has grew, I believe, even beyond my own personal story, right?
Yeah,
Because there's so many elements of what multiculturalism is and where it lives and resides with people, right?
hmm,
So October 17th through the 19th, I have the honor and pleasure of hosting It's a Different World Multicultural Maternal Mental Health Conference. Look,
yes,
and the theme, it's a different world. Of course, in the 80s, it was the Cosby Show. Aretha Franklin killed it. It's a different world from where we come from. And
yeah,
truthfully, that's us. It's a different world. We are living in a different sphere of this
yeah,
world, and we should be taking advantage of it all, right? We should be exposing the different worlds that we're coming from, but as we're collaborating and we're adding partnerships and stuff, look, this is something beyond a dream.
yes,
Is something beyond a dream. So, within the conference, we'll be talking about policy, about parenting, about lived experience. So we'll have various tracks for the professional, for the advocate, and for the person with lived experience. I myself, I will be hosting a focus group, and then there's also other focus groups that people can attend dealing with universal perinatal screenings. We'll have a virtual international, not only is she we'll have an international keynote speaker, but we'll also have a virtual breakout speaker who's speaking from Nigeria. So she's speaking about her culture. Look, we're talking about culture, conversation, and cultivation. How do we put this
yes,
thing together?
yes, 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 yes. We're gonna talk about that collaboration, and you know what I say to my staff at the Alliance all the time is that there's more power in us collaborating and connecting than there is in us trying to divide and try to find like feel like there's not enough uh, pieces of the pie. Let's collaborate together and let's take
Yeah.
all the pie. Let's work together and take all the pie and amplify one another's voices. Right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, this
absolutely.
this is, I think of as I'm doing this conference, I think of areas in my life in which I believe their voices should have been amplified then. So I
Hmm.
think of the incarcerated woman, right? I think of the
Yes.
woman that, is having birthing complications. I think of the woman that is standing before the court judge trying to receive custody back of her child. I think of the mom that's still in foster care system with her children, trying to figure it out. I think of the homeless woman and the
Yeah.
homeless families. I think of the professionals, right, that enter into each and every one of those people's lives and their situation. Are they well informed?
Right.
Or do they have the training that they need? How are they going to see this individual? So I feel like it's my job and duty to help them cleanse their lens. Cleanse
Mm.
your lens, because if you walk up in there and your lens is still dirty or still got a lot of residue from the house that you just left, you are not
Hmm.
going to see this person or individual as their circumstances present. You're going to equate them to whatever it is that you just left from. So,
Yeah.
I feel like this is one of those cleanse your lens moments. You
Yeah.
know, education will only get you so far, but it's nothing like experience a person that's in it,
Yes.
that's in it, not with it, but they in it, in the thick of it,
In the thick
you
of it.
know. Yes, because those people, not only are they going to be the best advocate for themselves, they're absolutely going to teach you something. So put on your
Absolutely.
listening ears.
Absolutely. I say that all the time. I was like, if you can't, there, you can learn something from everybody. If you're humble
Mhm.
enough, you can learn. And every person is the expert on their own lives and their own experiences. And
Yes.
so that's why I appreciate so much what you do in helping to um, help people understand and craft and rewrite their own narratives, but also
Yes.
helping folks to hear those narratives for what they are, right? Helping people who work with folks who are often forgotten or overlooked, helping us to hear each person's story for what it is, not
Mhm.
what we want it to be. Okay, so tell us again, what are the dates of the conference and how can we get more information about the conference, and how can we get more information about Shades of You, Shades of Me?
Oh yeah. So October 17th through the 19th, we're hosting, it's a different world conference in Seattle, Washington. And majority of information can be found on our website, which is www.soysom.com. Look, we do have a virtual option, but we want to be all like in the same space together. So if you could find your way, make your way to Seattle, absolutely. There is a place and space for you. And not only that, I want to speak about how PSI is also invested in this. If
Mhm.
you are a PSI member, there is a discount code of 15% off. And that is I'm sorry, hashtag PSI23. And once you put that code in, you go get that discount. And I myself personally can't wait to see you because I know that it's so many more people that have so many parts of this story. Let's be a collaborative body. Why
let's
not?
and let's be a collaborative body.
Mhm.
Thank you, Shonita Roach, for being with us today. And listen, if you all are out there and you some of what Shonita has talked about resonates with you, like she talked about the beginning of her story, like she had this baby and she just quite didn't feel like herself, or she was struggling in her relationship and didn't know how to take care of this little one too. We want you to know you are not alone. You'll see the numbers for the PSI helpline and for the maternal mental health hotline scrolling at the bottom of your screen. We have counselors available who speak English, who speak Spanish. If you are calling the maternal mental health hotline, there are counselors there who speak multiple languages too. We're going to get you connected to somebody who can get you the help that you need. If you are in crisis, if you feel like you don't know if you want to be here any longer and you just are at a point where you don't know what to do, you can call the crisis hotline. You don't even have to dial 10 digits. Just dial 988 and somebody will be there to assist you. Okay, you are not alone. And there's, as you heard in Shanita's story, we want to take the stigma away from you getting help and getting the help that you need. Okay? So please, please, please reach out. You can always find more information about PSI at www.postpartum.net. And you can follow the Alliance on all of our social media pages, the Alliance or our Spanish affiliate, La Alianza. Okay? Thank you, Shanita. I will looking forward to seeing you again, and seeing you again in Seattle. Where yes, that these people think that I know what I can speak or something. People asking me to keynote stuff, but it's just my honor to be there and to be with you. And so thank you so much for just you are just amazing. If you ain't inspired by this one, I don't know what y'all need. I'm trying to bring you the inspiration, honey. She got it all, right? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next month.
Yes.
All right, y'all. Until next time. Bye bye.